Hello, ladies, gentlemen, Nikki, Neki, everything between and surrounding. September's kind of a hard month to talk about new Japanese slang because the best buzzwords of the first half of the year list are already done, and the best buzzwords of the entire year list have yet to be created. And on top of that, all the Japanese slang goblins and the slang mines are on leave. So I thought I'd look at some terms in the past, going through various UCAN lists of top buzzwords of the year over the last few decades, as they've been doing this since like 1984. And while they're not the most interesting by far, they're very, very normie, to be honest, they are incredibly influential, as they're the ones that the mainstream news kind of talks about. So here's 4 in chronological order, starting with 1986, which gives us norisame. Now, norisame is not a shark made out of seaweed, unfortunately. Instead, this is a word kind of like tsundere and other terms in Japanese that take like two kind of vibes, attitudes, and put them together. Here from noru, to ride, but also like to get kind of carried away, to be vibing. Like choushi ni noru is to get carried away. And then sameru, or to cool, but also like to kind of become cold as in a person. So norisame was developed as a term to refer to somebody who is like really fun, exciting, energetic one day, like at a party or something, and then the next day is kind of cold and doesn't seem to respond. It's kind of an interesting little term that apparently at the time was developed because some actors were playing characters that had that type, but as of 2025, it's dead. It is a dead, dead word. The only hits on Twitter whatsoever are either just bots referencing the fact that it won the award a while ago, or people saying, oh, hey, this word used to exist. And like the Norisame-zoku, which is mentioned, the Norisame tribe, nowadays we'd say Kaiwai, has a whopping 9 hits on Google. So was this word fake? Well, no, it absolutely did exist. While Google itself doesn't have many hits, they do have a Google Books function. And this is very risky. It often gives false positives. But through it, I was able to find a number of books in the 1980s that mention the existence of these terms, many of them being kind of like slang term of the year magazine lists, etc. Even more interestingly though, this book here from 2011 contains a survey from 2010 where they actually went and interviewed a bunch of high school students about buzzwords nominated by UCAN throughout the start of 1984 up to 2009 to see how many of them they were still familiar with. And norisame does appear on this list with the tiniest little bit of recognition. Not 0, not impressive, but not 0. So some people did know about this word still. Why did norisame die? I don't know. Maybe it's actually kind of just too obscure of a personality type. There weren't that many of them, you know? Maybe when it won the award, norisame was like, hey, that's great. And then the next day it gave everyone the cold shoulder. I'm not sure. But it's possible that in making this video, based on my average views, the number of people that are aware of this term in 2025 may vastly increase over the amount that knew it a few days ago. And so while it's kind of unfortunate, of course, to tell you about a word you can't use, well, actually, you can't use most of the words I teach you, it is interesting to see that something that was in the top 10 can find its way to the grave in a few decades for sure. That's not the case, though, for our entry from 1994, which is yanmama. So mama here is just a mom, obviously, but the yan part here is, depending on your source, either from yangu or from yanki, which is like a type of Japanese juvenile delinquent. But the general flashpoint for this word entering the Japanese conscious was a magazine called Yanmama Komiku, that was released in 1993. And in the first issue of that, apparently, they stated that the term was intended to contain both of the meanings together. With the idea being that the publisher realized that these kind of younger mothers that may have had a bit of a, edgier side to them in high school, whatever, were an untapped market that needed a magazine like this. And indeed, the same claim can be found in this magazine from 1995 called New Feminism Review, which defines the term specifically as young mothers that used to be Yankee. And there are other people online claiming that basically a lot of, juvenile delinquent women had children when they were young, so that's how it got linked together. But regardless of what the actual origin is, this linking happened very, very quickly. That said, the story is complicated by the fact that Wikipedia claims the term has been used since back in the early 1980s. Minimally, searching Google Books, searching everything, I could not find one, though, that predates the start of the Yanmama Komiku magazine. As of 2025, though, yanmama absolutely does see use. Yes, there are people calling it a dead word on both Twitter and, Yahoo Chiebukuro, but it absolutely isn't. Indeed, as you can see on Google Trends, there was actually a spike in late 2017 and early 2018, and indeed, since then, it's had better interest than in the decade prior or so. I can't find out an exact reason, but there are 2 possibilities. One is that the term Yanmama Kaiwai appears around 2016 or so, but this is all the hits I could find, so I don't think it was a major discussion, but it could have, caused the increase. And additionally, a show called Dai Bimbo was released in early 2017, so that actually predates the Google Trends, but it did have a Yanmama specifically as the main character, and that got picked up in newspapers, etc. So this means that yanmama absolutely is still in use today, although I will say that the meaning has changed a little bit, probably because Yankee themselves are not like a subculture, a delinquency subculture that kind of still exists. You can find uses that refer just to like a young mother, like as far as I can tell, that's just what this is. It's just like a young mom. And there are uses that refer to like fashion sense, etc. That's kind of loud, showy, gaudy, that definitely evokes kind of Yankiness. But the biggest change is that nowadays it seems like Yanmama is basically being used as a synonym for young MILF. Like a lot of posts online using Yanmama are very clearly referencing it in a sexual way. For instance, this post here shows an attractive woman and notes that hanging their underwear on the veranda is meiwaku, and the person says, look, put up with the Yanmama hanging their underwear outside, please. Likewise, the person here, for instance, shows an image of a young woman from some kind of media product dressed fashionably. Doesn't look Yankee-ish to me, or delinquent-y, but they refer to them as a Yanmama. And trust me, there were much more explicit images out there. These are just the ones I feel comfortable showing here. Let's jump ahead now to 2006 for ero kakoi. Now, this is very straightforward, something that is cool looking and erotic. It's high fashion that is based in kind of erotica. And if we go back to that aforementioned book, that same survey that showed that Norisame was basically dead showed it to be going very, very strong in that year. Now, while a simple term, what's interesting about this one is it's kind of associated with a specific person, which is the singer Kumi Koda. In fact, it's so associated with her that even the English Wikipedia page for her notes her as a kind of flashpoint for this fashion style. Basically, Koda was known for provocative, for the time, outfits that combined elements of things like bondage, skimpy beachwear, etc., into high-performance fashion. That said, there is, of course, the question of whether or not she invented this term or just kind of brought it to the mainstream. And I can say I think it existed before. Google's date search is not really reliable anymore, but I was able to find a racing horse that was born in 2004 with the name Ero Kakui. The problem is, of course, that I don't think racing horses are given their name at birth. But I was able to find a 5chan post using it in 2005, which is before the award. That said, Koda has an album that came out in 2005 that shows a fair amount of skin on it, so maybe it was her. But certainly I can say that the term doesn't seem to have existed at least too many years before Koda became popular. In 2025, this term absolutely still sees use, although it has had an interesting evolution in that it's now very heavily used to refer to characters' fashion in video games. I suppose that's a pretty natural transition, but if you go online now and look for ero kakui, you can find, pictures of people, but a lot of it are pictures of character designs in video games that you find sexy, but also really cool. With that, let's move to 2010 for ikumen. So this is a parody of ikemen, which means handsome, but here it comes from ikuji, or like child raising, because an ikumen is a man who cares about and spends time doing child raising. Now, this term, of course, won in 2010, but I have been able to find evidence of it since 2008, and these posts are saying, oh, hey, this word kind of exists, so it seems to be new for those people. And Google Trends similarly shows interest from, about August of 2009, so a bit later. Once again, though, we have a lot of claims that this word has a specific creator, and this time, it's an advertising person going by the name of Maruyama Masaya. Now, I can't find out when they came up with it, but I'm guessing from this data it's around 2008, but they were looking for a term to use in an advertisement and decided to play off ikemen, coming up with ikumen. At least that's their story, and that went into a magazine which exploded nationwide. I cannot find a picture of this, but there are plentiful sources listing him as the origin, and there's no question that since this, ad copy came up, since whoever came up with this word, assuming it's him, it has become one of the most kind of mainstream in some ways, in that the Japanese government is using it in promotional material. And that's not the case for Yanmama or ero kakui, saying nothing, of course, of Norisame. So, I don't know how much it's celebrated, but apparently October 19th is Ikumen no Hi, because 10 is in the 10th month, can be to as in otosan, and then 19 can be iku, right? So 19th. But beyond that, government initiatives to get fathers more into kind of child rearing have used this term. For instance, Shimane Prefecture in 2016 and 2020 had people design posters that they eventually printed off and used, promoting not only ikumen, but also ikubosu, which here is a boss who is aware of the child rearing responsibilities of their workforce and makes concessions or allows flexibility so that people can engage with that responsibility. This term, by the way, has been in use since at least 2012, although shows increased use on Google Trends in 2014, but not to the extent of ikumen by any stretch of the imagination. But there are things like the Kyushu Ikubosu Alliance, which are stickers that businesses that Kyushu recognizes as having ikubosu of being a good place for parents to work. So again, it has been adopted by government organizations. And interestingly, within the same time phrase, the term shinpapa seems to have appeared. Now, this is, of course, a shortening of single father, kind of, with father becoming papa. And the first use I can find of this is 2009, so just before the award, both on Twitter and off Twitter, with Google Trends noting an increase in interest in 2012, jumping really high in 2016. And this is just a theory of mine, I have no evidence for this, but I'm wondering if the discussion of fatherhood, father-child rearing responsibilities, etc., due to words like ikumen at this time, and therefore the increased focus on fathers and fatherhood, was something that brought about shinpapa as kind of a useful term. Obviously, single fathers existed before them, as did other terms for them, But if the data here is correct and Sheen Papa evolved alongside Ikumen, I would not be surprised if there's some relation between these two. So there you go. Some of you probably knew some of these terms, I knew a few of them, but that's the history behind them and kind of where they came from. And it's nice to see that sometimes the new words that appear in these lists will survive. That's obviously not the case for last year's winner, Futehoro, which, as I talked about in this video, was a pretty terrible choice, especially because they could have gone with Kaiwai, which they nominated and actually does have some survivability. But I look forward to the 2025 list, where I'm sure they'll choose an absolutely terrible one for number 1, but within the top 10, there will be a term that we'll see used 10 years later. And I'll be sure to let you know if that happens, if I'm still making videos in a decade time.